Mia's hands tightened around her violin case, her heart pounding as Lisa, the ticket agent, leaned forward with a smirk. "This can't be your ticket," Lisa said coldly. "A first-class seat? Who are you trying to fool?" Mia's voice trembled as she tried to respond, but Lisa cut her off, reaching for the violin case. The faint scrape of the bow against the instrument's polished surface rang out, and Mia's breath caught. "You don't understand," Mia cried, tears threatening to spill. "This violin means everything to me," Lisa scoffed, her tone sharp. "Rules are rules. Maybe next time, don't pretend to be something you're not." Mia's humiliation deepened as whispers began to ripple through the lounge. People turned to stare, their judgmental eyes burning into her. The tension was thick, suffocating, and Mia felt her confidence crumble. Just as she thought she couldn't take any more, a commanding voice broke through the air. "What's going on here?" All heads turned to see a man with an imposing presence striding forward, his tone cutting through the tension like a blade. Mia's trembling hands, the condescending smirk, the scratch on the violin, the icy words that hung in the air. What would you have done if you were Mia, standing there, feeling judged and powerless? Or maybe, have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone doubted you before they even knew you? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how you rose above it. And where are you tuning in from today? It's always inspiring to see how far these stories travel and connect with people around the world. Don't forget to subscribe if you believe in the power of stories like this one to inspire change, hope, and resilience. Let's uncover the rest of Mia's journey together, her courage, her music, and the lesson she teaches us all. The morning light spilled softly into the spacious Carter family living room, casting a golden glow over its carefully curated decor. The shelves were lined with books, trinkets, and family photos, snapshots of a life filled with milestones and quiet joys. At the center of the room sat Mia, a petite 12-year-old, her figure dwarfed by the oversized velvet sofa she occupied. Her violin case rested beside her, its polished surface catching the light. The initials M.A. were etched into the case's leather in delicate script, a quiet testament to its owner's identity. Mia's fingers hovered over the engraved letters as her thoughts spiraled. Today's the day. The phrase looped in her mind, growing heavier with each repetition. Today was her first international concert, an event she had dreamed of for years. But dreams, she was learning, carried their own weight. "What if they don't take me seriously?" Mia whispered aloud, her voice so soft it almost dissolved into the room. She glanced at the framed photos on the wall, her gaze lingering on the most recent one. Herself between Eleanor and Richard, her adoptive parents. They had given her everything, a home, a future, and most importantly, belief in her talent. Yet, as she thought about the audience that awaited her in New York, doubt gnawed at her confidence. Will they see me as an artist, or just... Her words trailed off as she ran her hand over her tightly coiled hair, neatly pinned into a bun. Eleanor entered the room with her usual grace, her sharp features softened by a warm smile. Dressed in a tailored navy blouse and slacks, she looked every bit the powerful yet nurturing figure Mia had come to rely on. "Mia," Eleanor said, her voice gentle yet commanding, "what's going on in that head of yours?" Mia hesitated, then met her mother's gaze. "I'm just... nervous." Eleanor sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on Mia's. "It's normal to be nervous. It means you care about what you're doing." Mia nodded, but her brows furrowed. "What if they don't see me as a real musician? What if they just think I'm some lucky kid with rich parents?" Eleanor's smile faded into something more serious. She straightened her posture, leaning slightly closer to Mia. "Listen to me, Mia. You've earned every bit of this. Your talent, your discipline, your passion. That's what brought you here, not luck." "But what if they don't hear that in my music?" Mia asked, her voice cracking slightly. Eleanor's hand squeezed hers. "Then they're not listening the way they should. Your job isn't to convince them. Your job is to play for yourself and for the people who love you." Mia blinked back the sting of tears. "But what if they don't love me?" Eleanor's expression softened as she wrapped an arm around Mia's shoulders. "They will, sweetheart, just like I do, just like Richard does. Your music has a way of reaching people, whether they expect it to or not." The drive to Logan International Airport was unusually quiet. Richard sat in the driver's seat of their sleek black SUV, his hands steady on the wheel. A man of few words, he often let his actions speak for him. Today, however, his presence radiated calm reassurance. "Are you ready for this, kiddo?" he asked, glancing at Mia in the rearview mirror. Mia nodded, her hands gripping the violin case on her lap. "I think so." Richard's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good, because I know you are." Mia looked at her father, her heart swelling slightly at his quiet confidence. She wasn't sure where he found it, but she was grateful for it nonetheless. The airport terminal buzzed with activity, a constant hum of voices and footsteps blending into the air-conditioned chill. The VIP check-in area, however, was an oasis of calm. Its marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and the hushed conversations of well-dressed travelers created an atmosphere of exclusivity. Mia followed Eleanor and Richard into the lounge, her violin case in one hand and her boarding pass in the other. She could feel the weight of her parents' presence on either side of her, a protective barrier she wished she didn't need. At the check-in counter stood Lisa Carter, a woman in her mid-30s with neatly tied auburn hair and an immaculate uniform. Her smile was polished and professional, but when her eyes landed on Mia, a flicker of something else passed over her face. Curiosity? Skepticism? "Good morning," Lisa said, her tone courteous but clipped. "How may I assist you?" Eleanor stepped forward, handing over Mia's boarding pass. "My daughter is traveling on Flight 437 to New York. She has a first-class ticket." Lisa's eyes scanned the pass, then shifted to Mia. Her polite smile tightened ever so slightly. "This ticket is for first class," Lisa said, as if confirming a fact that didn't quite make sense to her. "Yes, it is," Eleanor replied, her tone steady. Lisa's gaze flicked back to the ticket. "Is she traveling alone?" "Yes, but—" Eleanor began, but Lisa cut her off. "I'll need to verify this," Lisa said, setting the ticket down and walking away without another word. As the minutes dragged on, Mia shifted her weight uncomfortably. She could feel the glances of other passengers around her, their curiosity palpable. "Why is she taking so long?" Mia whispered. Eleanor placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. "It's nothing to worry about, sweetheart. Sometimes people need a little longer to catch up to the truth." Mia tried to take comfort in her mother's words, but doubt lingered. Lisa returned with the ticket, her expression neutral, but her voice firm. "I'll need to see identification as well." Mia handed over her passport, her fingers trembling slightly. Lisa studied it for an uncomfortably long time before nodding curtly and handing it back. "Wait here," Lisa said again before disappearing into the back office. The tension in the air grew heavier with each passing moment. Richard glanced at Eleanor, his jaw tightening. "I'm going to call someone." Eleanor shook her head. "Let's wait. I don't want to escalate things unless we have to." Mia looked between her parents, their usually calm demeanor tinged with frustration. "She doesn't think I belong here," Mia said softly, her voice barely audible. Eleanor turned to her, her eyes blazing with determination. "She's wrong." As Mia looked down at her violin case, the familiar weight steadied her. Whatever lay ahead, she reminded herself of Eleanor's words. "Your music will speak for itself. With a deep breath, she straightened her posture and waited for whatever was next. The VIP check-in area was a polished oasis within the bustling chaos of Logan International Airport. Gleaming marble floors reflected the soft glow of pendant lights, and the quiet murmur of well-dressed travelers created an air of exclusivity. Mia stood at the counter, gripping her violin case tightly, her posture betraying both her determination and unease. Behind the counter, Lisa Carter was flipping through a clipboard with practiced efficiency. At 35, she exuded confidence in her perfectly pressed uniform and neat ponytail. Yet, beneath her professional exterior lay a tendency to form judgments at first glance, a habit that often dictated how she treated people. Her eyes flicked up as Mia approached, scanning the young girl with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Lisa's smile was polite but strained, her brows lifting slightly as she took in Mia's modest dress and tightly coiled hair pinned neatly back. "Good morning," Lisa said, her tone polite but devoid of warmth. "May I help you?" Mia nodded, her small hands extending the boarding pass. "I'm here for Flight 437 to New York." Lisa took the ticket, her manicured nails clicking lightly against the paper. Her gaze lingered on the boarding pass before moving back to Mia, her smile tightening. "This ticket is for first class," Lisa said, as though pointing out a mistake. "Yes, ma'am," Mia replied softly. "My parents booked it for me." Lisa's lips curved into a thin, almost amused smile. "Traveling alone, are we?" Mia nodded again, her grip on the violin case tightening. "Well, let's see," Lisa said, her tone dripping with faux sweetness. She glanced at the ticket once more before looking back at Mia. "I'll need to verify a few things. Please wait here." Lisa walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she disappeared into an office. Mia remained at the counter, acutely aware of the stares from the other passengers in the lounge. "She doesn't believe me," Mia whispered under her breath, her voice tinged with both frustration and hurt. Her mind raced as she tried to steady her breathing. Why does this always happen? Why can't they just see me for who I am? Eleanor's voice echoed in her memory. Some people might see the wrong things first, but that's not your burden to carry. Mia straightened her back, willing herself to stay calm. Minutes ticked by before Lisa returned, holding the ticket as though it were evidence in a trial. She set it down on the counter with deliberate slowness, her smile now overtly condescending. "Well," Lisa said, her voice edged with mock cheerfulness, "everything seems to check out, for now, but I'll need to see some identification." Mia retrieved her passport from her bag, her fingers trembling slightly. She handed it over, hoping the process would end quickly. Lisa examined the passport, her eyes narrowing as though searching for a discrepancy. Finally, she handed it back, her smile never wavering. "Interesting," she said lightly. "It's not every day we see someone so young flying first class. You must have very generous parents." Mia swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "They just want me to get to my concert safely." Lisa's eyes shifted to the violin case Mia held protectively. Her brow lifted again, this time with thinly veiled disbelief. "And what's this?" Lisa asked, gesturing to the case. Mia hesitated. "It's my violin." Lisa chuckled softly, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Oh, I see. A musician, are we?" Mia nodded, keeping her voice steady. "Yes, I'm performing in New York tonight." Lisa reached for the violin case. "Mind if I take a look? We have to ensure there's nothing suspicious." Mia stepped back slightly, alarm flashing across her face. "It's just a violin. Please be careful." Ignoring her, Lisa opened the case and examined the instrument inside. Her fingers grazed the strings carelessly, and the bow shifted out of place. "This is lovely," Lisa said, her tone dripping with insincerity, "though it seems a bit extravagant for a young girl." As she closed the case, the clasp caught against the polished wood, leaving a small but visible scratch. Mia's breath hitched. "What are you doing?" she cried, her voice trembling. "You don't understand how important this is to me." Lisa raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by Mia's outburst. "Relax, sweetheart. It's just a scratch." Tears welled in Mia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She took the violin case back, cradling it like a wounded friend. "This isn't fair. I didn't do anything wrong." Her thoughts churned with anger and confusion. Why can't they just see me for who I am? Why do they always look at my skin, my age, my clothes? The tension broke when a familiar voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" Mia turned to see Jonathan Blake, her music director, striding toward them with a mixture of concern and authority. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he exuded a presence that was hard to ignore. Lisa straightened, her demeanor shifting slightly. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" Jonathan's gaze flicked to Mia, then back to Lisa. "Yes, you can. This young lady is my lead soloist for tonight's concert in New York. I'd like to know why she's being delayed." Lisa's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "I'm just following protocol, sir. We have to ensure all passengers meet the necessary requirements." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Protocol? Or assumptions? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're treating her differently than anyone else in this lounge." Lisa's cheeks flushed slightly, but she held her ground. "I assure you, sir, I'm simply doing my job." "Your job," Jonathan said, his voice firm, "is to ensure passengers have a smooth experience, not to humiliate them." Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, another figure approached. It was the lounge supervisor, alerted by the commotion. "Is there a problem here?" the supervisor asked, her gaze shifting between Jonathan and Lisa. Jonathan didn't hesitate. "Yes, there is. Your agent has been treating my soloist with unnecessary scrutiny and disrespect." The supervisor frowned, her attention turning to Lisa. "Ms. Carter, is this true?" Lisa's composure wavered for the first time. "I was just following—" "We'll handle this," the supervisor said firmly, cutting her off. As the supervisor escorted Lisa away, Jonathan turned back to Mia. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Mia nodded, though her grip on the violin case betrayed her lingering unease. "Let's get to the gate," Jonathan said, his tone softening. "You have a concert to focus on." Mia followed him, her steps steady, but her heart heavy. She glanced back once, catching Lisa's gaze as the agent disappeared into the supervisor's office. For a brief moment, she thought she saw regret flicker across Lisa's face, but it was gone just as quickly, leaving Mia unsure if it had been real. The quiet hum of the VIP lounge had shifted into a charged silence, every eye subtly turning toward the escalating scene at the check-in counter. Mia stood beside Jonathan, her fingers gripping the handle of her violin case so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Despite Jonathan's commanding presence, the doubt etched on Lisa's face remained firmly in place. Lisa held the boarding pass between her manicured fingers, her lips curling into a faint smirk. A 12-year-old as the lead soloist for an international concert? Forgive me if I find that a bit unlikely. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his tone sharpening. Unlikely or not, it's the truth. Mia is a prodigy, and tonight's audience will know that. Your personal doubts don't change the facts. Lisa's smile didn't waver, but her eyes gleamed with defiance. I'm just doing my job, sir, ensuring that all our passengers meet the necessary requirements. Her ticket is valid, Jonathan said firmly. Her identification checks out. What more do you need? Lisa glanced down at the boarding pass again, as though inspecting it would reveal some hidden flaw. We can't be too careful, can we? She replied lightly. Let me double-check a few things. She turned her back and walked to the computer terminal, typing deliberately. The seconds dragged on as Jonathan let out a slow breath, his patience clearly fraying. Mia shifted her weight uncomfortably, her eyes darting around the lounge. The whispers had started again, low murmurs from the other passengers who had taken notice of the scene. Who is she? One voice whispered. Why are they holding her up? She doesn't look like the usual VIPs, another added. Heat crept up Mia's neck, her cheeks flushing as she tried to ignore the growing attention. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing louder in her ears. I don't understand, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. Why doesn't she believe me? Jonathan crouched slightly to meet her gaze, his expression softening despite his visible frustration. Some people, he said gently, let their assumptions speak louder than the truth. That's not your fault, Mia. Mia nodded, but the knot in her chest only tightened. Why is it always like this? Why can't they just see me for who I am? Lisa returned to the counter, the same condescending smile plastered on her face. It seems everything is in order, she said slowly, her tone far from convincing. Good, Jonathan said sharply. Then we'll be heading to the gate now. But Lisa didn't step aside. Instead, she placed the boarding pass back on the counter, her fingers tapping against the marble surface. Not quite yet, she said. I need to verify one last thing. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. What else could you possibly need to verify? Lisa feigned an apologetic shrug. Well, sir, we can't just let anyone into the VIP section without proper confirmation. There's no harm in being thorough, is there? Mia's stomach churned as Lisa turned to her. You said your parents booked this ticket for you, correct? Are they available to confirm that? She doesn't need to call her parents, Jonathan snapped. She has me, her director, standing right here. My word should be enough. Lisa raised an eyebrow. With all due respect, sir, it's not about your word. It's about ensuring we follow procedure. As Lisa began typing into her computer again, a security officer in the corner of the lounge shifted his attention to the scene. He tapped his earpiece and murmured something, his eyes narrowing slightly as he observed the interaction. In the central security room, a row of monitors displayed live footage from cameras throughout the lounge. The officer's report had already drawn attention, and several supervisors leaned closer to the screens, showing Lisa's counter. Do you see that? One of them muttered, pointing at the screen. That doesn't look right. Another supervisor nodded, his expression grim. Flag this for review. I want a full report on her actions. If there's an issue, we'll escalate it. Back at the counter, Mia's anxiety was reaching a breaking point. She could feel the weight of every stare, every whisper, pressing down on her like a physical force. Her breaths came quicker, her grip on the violin case tightening even further. Why doesn't she believe me? Mia thought, her mind spiraling. I have everything I need, my ticket, my ID, Jonathan, but it's still not enough. What more do I have to prove? Jonathan must have sensed her distress because he placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Mia, he said softly, don't let this get to you. You know who you are. That's what matters. Mia nodded, but the knot in her chest refused to loosen. Finally, Lisa looked up from her terminal, her smile sharper than before. It appears everything checks out, she said, her tone making the words sound like a reluctant concession rather than a resolution. Good, Jonathan said, his voice clipped. Lisa, however, didn't step aside. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening. But let me say this. If this young lady is as special as you claim she is, then I'm sure her parents won't mind coming here to clear things up. The silence that followed was deafening. Mia's eyes widened, her chest tightening as humiliation washed over her. Jonathan's hand fell from her shoulder as he took a step forward, his posture radiating barely restrained anger. "That's enough," he said coldly. "We've given you everything you need. You've delayed us long enough. If you won't step aside, I'll be speaking to your manager." Lisa's expression faltered for the first time, but she quickly recovered, her smile returning. "Of course, sir. I'm just doing my job." Behind the scenes, the security team had already escalated the situation. A supervisor was on their way to the lounge, armed with the flagged footage and prepared to intervene. For now, though, the tension at the counter remained palpable, a battle of wills between Jonathan and Lisa, with Mia caught in the middle. Mia glanced at the violin case in her hands, its familiar weight grounding her despite the storm raging around her. She thought of the concert waiting for her in New York, the stage where she would finally be free to speak through her music. "If I can just get there," she thought, "I can show them who I really am." Mia clutched her phone tightly, her hands trembling as tears blurred her vision. The airport lounge around her seemed to fade into the background as she waited for the call to connect. When Eleanor's voice finally came through, steady and familiar, Mia could no longer hold back her emotions. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking, I don't know what to do. She doesn't believe me. She won't let me board." Eleanor's voice sharpened immediately. "What happened, Mia? Take a deep breath and tell me everything." Through stifled sobs, Mia recounted the humiliating ordeal, the constant questioning, the dismissive remarks, and the way Lisa had handled her violin. "She scratched it, Mum. She didn't even care," Mia said, her voice trembling. Eleanor's tone turned resolute. "Stay where you are, Mia. I'm coming to the airport right now." "But Mum, you have meetings." "None of that matters," Eleanor interrupted. "You are what matters." Mia nodded, even though Eleanor couldn't see her, a glimmer of relief cutting through the haze of anxiety. Eleanor arrived at Logan International Airport in record time, clad in a tailored blazer and heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. She exuded an aura of authority that turned heads as she strode through the terminal. Her eyes locked onto the VIP check-in counter where Mia stood beside Jonathan. Eleanor's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter, clutching her violin case as though it were the only thing anchoring her. "Mia!" Eleanor called out, her voice firm but filled with warmth. Mia turned, and the moment she saw her mother, she ran toward her, tears threatening to spill again. Eleanor knelt slightly to meet her, wrapping her arms around the girl. "It's okay, sweetheart," Eleanor said softly. "I'm here now." Jonathan approached, his face a mix of relief and frustration. "Thank goodness you're here, Eleanor. This situation has been utterly ridiculous." Eleanor straightened, her posture radiating strength. "Where is she?" Jonathan gestured toward Lisa, who was typing at her terminal with an air of forced indifference. Eleanor marched toward the counter, her heels clicking with purposeful force. Lisa looked up, her professional smile faltering slightly under Eleanor's intense gaze. "Good afternoon, Ma'am," Lisa began, her tone cautious. Eleanor didn't waste a second. "Why have you detained my daughter and treated her with such disrespect?" Lisa blinked, clearly caught off guard by Eleanor's directness. "Ma'am, I was simply verifying her information. It's standard protocol." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Standard protocol does not include insulting a child, damaging her belongings, or publicly humiliating her." Lisa straightened her posture, her smile turning defensive. "I assure you, ma'am, I was only doing my job. Your daughter seemed unusually young to be traveling alone in first class." "Unusually young?" Eleanor repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "And that justifies your actions? My daughter doesn't need to meet your arbitrary standards to prove her worth. Her ticket is valid. Her identification is valid. That should have been enough for you." Lisa's smile tightened. "I didn't mean to imply anything, Ma'am. I was simply being thorough." Eleanor leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a calm but commanding tone. "Let me make one thing very clear. My daughter doesn't need to prove anything to you. She has every right to be here, more than most, in fact." The tension thickened as Lisa struggled to maintain her composure. Just then, a deep voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" All heads turned as Richard entered the lounge. His imposing figure and quiet authority immediately shifted the atmosphere. Though his expression was calm, his presence carried an unspoken warning. "Richard," Eleanor said, her tone softening only slightly. He nodded at her before turning his attention to Lisa. "I heard there's been an issue with my daughter's boarding process." Lisa's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise. "Sir, I was simply ensuring everything was in order. It's standard procedure." Richard's gaze hardened. "Standard procedure doesn't involve delaying a passenger without cause or damaging their property. I've reviewed enough complaints in my time to know the difference between protocol and prejudice." Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but Richard raised a hand to stop her. "Before you speak, let me ask you this. Do you know who I am?" Lisa hesitated, her confidence wavering for the first time. "No, sir," she admitted. "I'm Richard Carter," he said evenly, "one of the largest shareholders in this airport, and the father of the young lady you've spent the last hour humiliating." The color drained from Lisa's face. Jonathan, who had been standing quietly beside Mia, finally spoke up. "I think we've all seen enough. Lisa's actions have been completely unprofessional and unacceptable." Lisa looked to Richard, her voice shaking slightly. "Sir, I was only—" "You were only what?" Richard interrupted. "Doing your job? Because I don't see how questioning a 12-year-old's legitimacy as a first-class passenger or mishandling her belongings falls under doing your job." Lisa's hands fidgeted at her sides, her composed facade crumbling. I didn't mean any harm." "Harm or not," Eleanor said, her tone sharp, "you've caused my daughter an immense amount of stress and embarrassment. If you don't understand the weight of your actions, perhaps you shouldn't be in a position where you deal with people." The lounge supervisor approached, alerted by the commotion. "Is there an issue here?" Richard turned to the supervisor, his tone firm. "Yes, your agent has treated my daughter with unacceptable disrespect. I expect this to be addressed immediately." The supervisor's expression turned serious as she glanced at Lisa. "Ms. Carter, I'll need to speak with you privately." Lisa nodded, her face pale as she followed the supervisor out of the lounge. As the tension began to dissipate, Eleanor knelt beside Mia again, brushing a stray tear from her daughter's cheek. "Don't let people like her make you doubt yourself, Mia," Eleanor said gently. "You're stronger than that." Mia nodded, her grip on her violin case relaxing slightly. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've got this, kiddo. Let's get to your gate." With her parents on either side, Mia stood a little taller as they walked toward the departure area. For the first time that day, she felt like the weight of the world had lifted, if only a little. Lisa stood rooted behind the counter, her polished composure slipping further with every passing second. The realization that Richard Carter, the man confronting her with quiet but unmistakable authority, was a major shareholder of the airport, sent a jolt of unease through her. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, she straightened her posture and forced a smile onto her face. "Sir," she began, her voice faltering slightly before steadying, "I was only following protocol. No one, no matter how influential, is exempt from security procedures." Richard's gaze sharpened, his tone calm but cutting. "Security procedures?" he repeated, the words dripping with disbelief. Security procedures don't include belittling a child, damaging her property, or subjecting her to unnecessary scrutiny. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but Richard continued, his voice firm. Your actions didn't come from a place of diligence. They came from a place of prejudice. That has no place here. Mia stood beside Eleanor, her small frame trembling slightly as she clutched her violin case. Eleanor placed a steadying hand on Mia's shoulder, her touch firm and reassuring. Lisa, meanwhile, glanced between Richard and the growing number of onlookers. She could feel the weight of their stares, their silent judgment pressing down on her like an invisible force. I assure you, sir, Lisa said, her words careful, my actions were purely professional. I was simply ensuring everything was in order. I didn't mean any harm. Harm or not, Richard replied coldly. The damage has been done. He paused, studying her intently. Then, as though something clicked in his memory, his expression shifted. Tell me, Richard said, his voice quieter but no less commanding. How long have you worked here? Lisa blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change in topic. I've been at this airport for 7 years, she said cautiously. But why does that matter? Richard's gaze didn't waver. Do you remember the grant you received 7 years ago? The one that kept your home from being foreclosed? Lisa froze, her carefully constructed facade cracking. I don't understand, Lisa stammered. I received help from a charitable organization, but I didn't know. Richard's expression softened ever so slightly, though his disappointment remained palpable. That charitable organization was funded by my family's foundation. You didn't know because we never asked for recognition. We simply wanted to help people who were struggling. Lisa's face turned pale as the weight of his words sank in. I didn't know it was you. I thought... She trailed off, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. Mia watched the exchange with wide eyes, her own emotions a mix of confusion and unease. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension, sharp and unwavering. Whether you knew or not doesn't excuse your behavior today. The fact that someone once showed you kindness makes your actions toward my daughter all the more disappointing. Lisa's mouth opened and closed as she struggled to find a response. The tension reached a breaking point when a team of security personnel arrived, led by a stern-faced officer with a tablet in hand. Excuse me, Mr. Carter, the officer said, addressing Richard respectfully. We've been reviewing the incident and have something to show you. He tapped the screen and a video began to play. It was security footage from the lounge showing Lisa's interactions with Mia in excruciating detail. The dismissive glances, the condescending remarks, the careless handling of the violin. Eleanor's grip on Mia's shoulder tightened as the footage played. Mia's cheeks burned with humiliation as she watched the scene unfold from a third-person perspective. When the video ended, the officer turned to Lisa, his expression grave. Ms. Carter, your behavior was inappropriate and unprofessional. This footage will be submitted to airport management for further disciplinary action. Lisa's face turned an even deeper shade of pale. She glanced around as though searching for an escape, but there was none. She began, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to escalate like this. Richard stepped forward, his voice heavy with disappointment. Escalate? That's an understatement. You didn't just escalate a situation, you created it. You had every opportunity to treat my daughter with the respect she deserves, and you chose not to. Lisa looked down, her hands trembling. I'm sorry, she said quietly, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Mia watched her, a strange mix of emotions swirling in her chest. She wanted to feel vindicated, but all she felt was exhaustion. Eleanor knelt beside Mia, brushing a stray tear from her daughter's cheek. "You don't need to carry the weight of her mistakes, Mia," she said softly. "Let's focus on what's ahead." Mia nodded, clutching her violin case tighter. As the security team escorted Lisa away, Richard turned to Mia and knelt to meet her gaze. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice warm but firm. "You handled yourself with grace, even when others didn't." Mia's eyes welled with tears, but she managed a small smile. "I just want to get to my concert," she said quietly. "And you will," Richard assured her. "No one's going to stop you now." With Eleanor and Richard on either side of her, Mia walked toward the departure gate, her steps steady, but her heart still heavy. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to believe that the worst was behind her. The tension in the lounge was suffocating, an invisible weight pressing down on everyone present. Richard stood tall, his commanding presence making Lisa seem smaller with each passing second. His usually calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet fury that made his words cut sharper. "7 years ago," Richard began, his voice low but firm, "my family's foundation gave you a lifeline. We didn't ask for anything in return. We didn't even let you know who was behind it. And yet today, you've chosen to treat my daughter with contempt. Where is your gratitude?" Lisa's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't know it was you. I thought I was just doing my job." Richard's eyes narrowed, his tone turning colder. "Doing your job? Humiliating a 12-year-old girl, damaging her violin, and questioning her every move? That's your job? If that's what you believe, then you're in the wrong profession." Mia's heart raced as she listened, her emotions a tangled mess of embarrassment, anger, and sadness. She looked at Lisa, who now seemed less like the self-assured agent she had first encountered and more like someone desperately trying to hold herself together. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice ringing out with a sharp clarity that drew every eye in the room. "My daughter," she said, her words deliberate and unwavering, "has worked harder than most adults to reach where she is today. She doesn't deserve to be treated like this. Not by anyone." Eleanor's gaze bore into Lisa. "You didn't just damage her violin. You hurt her. You made her question herself, her worth. Do you have any idea how hard she's worked, how many sacrifices she's made to be on that stage tonight?" Mia's eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't want this to get worse. I just want to leave. I just want to go to the concert." Eleanor turned to her daughter, her expression softening. "I know, sweetheart, but you shouldn't have to carry this alone. You deserve better." Lisa's breathing quickened, her mind racing as guilt and fear swirled together in an overwhelming storm. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the judgmental stares of the other passengers, the cold authority in Richard's expression, and the quiet strength emanating from Eleanor. "What have I done?" she thought, her chest tightening. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just trying to do my job. But maybe I was wrong." Her thoughts spiraled further, doubt creeping into every corner of her mind. Would an apology even matter now? Or is it already too late? If I admit my mistakes, will I lose everything I've worked for? The sound of approaching footsteps broke the heavy silence. A representative from the airport's management team arrived, their badge gleaming under the lounge's soft lighting. The woman, tall and poised, surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. "I'm Samantha Ward," the representative said, her voice calm but authoritative. "I understand there's been an issue with one of our staff members?" Richard stepped forward, his tone steady. "Yes, Ms. Carter has displayed behavior that's both unprofessional and completely unacceptable. I believe you've already reviewed the security footage." Samantha nodded, her expression growing serious. I have, and based on what I've seen, Ms. Carter's actions violate several of our customer service policies. We take matters like this very seriously. She turned to Lisa, her gaze firm. Ms. Carter, I'll need you to accompany me to the management office for further discussion. Your behavior today does not reflect the standards we uphold at this airport. Lisa's face crumpled, the weight of the situation finally crashing down on her. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. As Samantha prepared to escort Lisa away, the agent turned to Mia, her eyes brimming with tears. I've been wrong, Lisa said, her voice trembling. I don't have any excuse for how I treated you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity, yet tinged with desperation. Mia stared at Lisa, her emotions swirling once again. She wanted to feel relief, maybe even vindication. But all she felt was a deep, aching sadness. For Lisa, for herself, and for the moment that had been tarnished by everything that had happened. Come on, Mia, Eleanor said softly, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Mia nodded, her voice too tight to speak. As she turned to leave, she glanced back at Lisa one last time. The agent stood there, her shoulders slumped and her head bowed, looking more defeated than ever. The walk to the gate was silent, save for the soft click of Eleanor's heels and the quiet murmur of the lounge behind them. Mia held her violin case tightly, drawing strength from its familiar weight. You okay, sweetheart? Eleanor asked, her voice gentle. Mia nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. I just want to get to the concert, she said quietly. Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You'll get there, Mia, and you'll show them all what you're capable of. Mia managed a small smile, her parents' unwavering support giving her the strength to keep moving forward. The atmosphere in the lounge was tense as Samantha Ward, the representative from airport management, prepared to announce the decision. Security personnel stood at attention nearby, their presence underscoring the seriousness of the situation. Lisa stood rigid, her face pale but composed, as though bracing herself for what was to come. After reviewing the evidence, Samantha began, her voice firm but even, and considering the accounts provided by both Mr. Carter and other witnesses, it is clear that your actions today were inexcusable. Ms. Carter Lisa remained silent, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. This airport holds all staff to the highest standards of professionalism and respect, Samantha continued. Your treatment of Mia Carter was not only unprofessional, but also deeply inappropriate. Effective immediately, your employment with this airport is terminated. Lisa's composure wavered, her lips parting slightly as the weight of the words sank in. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, the defiance she had carried earlier disappeared entirely. I understand, Lisa said quietly, her voice trembling but steady. I have no excuse for my actions. I accept the consequences. Samantha nodded curtly. Security will escort you to collect your belongings and ensure the process is smooth. This incident will also be documented in your personnel file. The air in the room felt heavy as the decision was finalized. For a moment, no one moved. Then, one of the security officers stepped forward, gesturing for Lisa to follow. Mia stood silently beside Eleanor and Richard, her violin case clutched tightly against her chest. As Lisa walked past her, escorted by the officer, their eyes met briefly. Lisa's once confident demeanor was now replaced by a mixture of regret and defeat. Her gaze lingered on Mia, as though searching for words that wouldn't come. Mia watched her go, her emotions swirling. Part of her felt relief. Justice had been served. But another part of her, a quieter part, felt a pang of sadness. Lisa no longer seemed like the overbearing figure she had been earlier. Now she looked small, lost, and broken. Eleanor knelt beside Mia, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You don't need to think about her anymore, sweetheart," Eleanor said softly. "She made her choices. Now it's time for you to focus on what matters, your music." Mia nodded slowly, her grip on the violin case tightening. "It's just, I don't know how to feel," she admitted. "She hurt me. But seeing her like that..." Eleanor smiled gently. "It's okay to feel conflicted, Mia. Compassion doesn't mean excusing what she did. It means understanding that people are complicated and sometimes they lose their way." Richard stepped forward, his voice steady. "Your mum's right, Mia. What matters now is what you do next. You've worked too hard to let this hold you back." Mia looked up at him, her eyes searching his for reassurance. "What if I mess up?" she asked quietly. Richard knelt down to her level, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "You won't. You've got this. And no matter what happens, we're proud of you." Eleanor stood, extending a hand to Mia. "Come on," she said with a warm smile. "Let's get you to that concert." Mia took a deep breath, then nodded, slipping her hand into her mother's. As they turned to leave, she glanced back one last time. Lisa stood in the corner of the lounge, just beyond the security officers, watching them go. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes carried a weight of regret that Mia couldn't ignore. Mia turned away, her focus shifting back to the path ahead. The walk to the gate was quiet, each step feeling lighter than the last. As they approached the departure area, Eleanor glanced at her daughter, noting the way Mia's posture had straightened, the way she held her violin case with renewed purpose. "You okay?" Eleanor asked gently. Mia nodded, offering a small but genuine smile. "Yeah, I think I am." Richard placed a hand on her back, guiding her forward. "Let's go show them what you can do, kiddo." As they boarded the plane, the tension that had loomed over them since the morning began to dissipate. Mia settled into her seat, her violin resting securely beside her. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the engines calm her nerves. Lisa, meanwhile, sat in the small office where security had taken her to finalize the termination process. Her hands shook slightly as she signed the necessary paperwork, each stroke of the pen feeling heavier than the last. She thought back to the moment she had first seen Mia at the counter. She had made assumptions, let her biases dictate her actions, and now she was paying the price. Her thoughts spiraled, guilt and regret consuming her. If only I had done things differently. As she exited the office, escorted by security, Lisa caught a glimpse of the departing plane through a large window. She watched as it taxied onto the runway, carrying Mia and her family toward a brighter destination. Mia gazed out of the airplane window as the city below grew smaller and smaller. Her heart still carried the weight of the morning's events, but alongside it was a growing sense of determination. She reached for her violin case, her fingers brushing over the familiar scuffs and scratches. They were marks of a journey, one that had tested her but had not broken her. With her parents seated beside her, their unwavering support a comforting presence, Mia allowed herself to smile. The concert ahead wasn't just an opportunity to showcase her talent. It was a chance to remind herself and everyone else of who she truly was. The Grand Concert Hall in New York City was a sight to behold. Its high-vaulted ceilings, adorned with ornate chandeliers and gilded details, created an atmosphere of opulence and tradition. Rows upon rows of plush red seats stretched from the orchestra pit to the balconies above, every one of them occupied by an audience eager for the evening's performance. The stage itself was a masterpiece of simplicity and elegance. A single grand piano stood to one side, surrounded by a semicircle of empty chairs and music stands for the accompanying orchestra. But at the center, illuminated by a spotlight, was a lone chair and music stand, the place where Mia would soon take her seat. Backstage, Mia adjusted the strap of her violin case, her heart pounding in her chest. She had dreamed of this moment for as long as she could remember. Yet, the events of the day weighed heavily on her, threatening to cloud her focus. Eleanor knelt beside her, fixing a stray curl that had escaped Mia's bun. "You ready, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Mia took a deep breath, nodding. "I think so." Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They're here to hear you, Mia. Show them who you are." As the audience settled in, the lights dimmed and a large screen descended from the ceiling. The audience murmured curiously as the screen flickered to life, displaying the logo of the concert's organizers. A voice echoed through the hall. "Before we begin tonight's performance, we'd like to share a story, a reminder of why music and art are so vital in uniting us all." The screen transitioned to footage from the airport earlier that day. Mia's small frame standing at the VIP counter, Lisa's dismissive gestures, and the heated confrontation with Eleanor and Richard played out before the hushed audience. The video concluded with the resolution showing Mia walking toward her departure gate with her parents by her side. The audience's reaction was immediate. Gasps of disbelief and murmurs of outrage rippled through the hall. One woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "That poor girl," she whispered. A man seated near the center leaned toward his companion. "She's more than a musician," he said quietly. "She's a fighter." When the screen faded to black, the audience erupted into applause, not for the injustice they had witnessed, but for the courage of the young girl they were about to see perform. Moments later, the stage lights brightened, and Mia stepped into view. The audience fell silent, all eyes on the small figure walking toward the center of the stage. She carried her violin case with a steady grip, her head held high despite the nervous energy coursing through her. As Mia reached her spot, she placed the case gently on the chair and opened it. The soft sound of the clasps echoed in the silent hall. She lifted the violin, its surface still bearing the faint scratch from earlier that day, and rested it beneath her chin. Before she began to play, Mia took a step toward the microphone. "This piece," she began, her voice clear and steady despite the lump in her throat, "is for everyone who has ever been judged unfairly. For those who have been seen as less because of their age, their appearance, or where they come from." Her eyes scanned the audience, landing briefly on her parents in the front row before continuing. "I hope that through this music, we can begin to look beyond what we see on the outside and start connecting with one another in ways that truly matter. Thank you for listening." She stepped back, raising her bow. The first note sang out, pure and resonant, filling the hall with a haunting melody. Mia's composition was a blend of sorrow and hope, each note weaving a story that touched the deepest parts of the audience's hearts. The orchestra joined in, their harmonies rising and falling in perfect tandem with Mia's playing. It was as though the violin were an extension of her soul, speaking the words she couldn't find, expressing emotions too complex for language. As the final note hung in the air, a profound silence blanketed the hall. Then, as if a dam had burst, the audience erupted into thunderous applause. Tears streamed down the faces of many in the audience. Some stood, clapping furiously, while others simply sat, stunned by what they had just experienced. A man in the balcony stood and addressed the hall. "This young lady isn't just a musician," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "She's a symbol of resilience, compassion, and the power of art to change the world." The applause grew louder, the ovation seeming to stretch into eternity. Backstage, Mia could hear the cheers as she lowered her violin and bowed deeply to the audience. Her chest swelled with pride, not just for her performance, but for what it represented. As she turned to leave the stage, she caught sight of Eleanor and Richard standing just beyond the curtain, their smiles wide and their eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You were amazing," Eleanor said, pulling her into a tight hug. Richard ruffled her hair gently. "You showed them, kiddo. You showed them all." Mia smiled, her heart lighter than it had been all day. As the audience slowly filtered out of the hall, whispers of Mia's name filled the air. Journalists scribbled furiously, and concertgoers exchanged words of admiration and awe. Outside, the city lights twinkled against the night sky, a backdrop to the newfound sense of hope Mia carried with her. For the first time, she truly felt it. She wasn't just a musician. She was a messenger, a symbol of what could be achieved when courage met compassion. With her violin case in hand, Mia stepped out into the crisp night air, ready for whatever came next. The small classroom was a far cry from the gleaming counters and polished floors of the VIP lounge at Logan International Airport. The walls were plain, the furniture modest, but the air was thick with purpose. A semicircle of chairs filled the room, occupied by people from all walks of life. Some sat with arms crossed defensively, while others leaned forward, eager to listen. Lisa Carter sat among them, her posture stiff and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It had been weeks since she was dismissed from her job at the airport, and the humiliation of that day still lingered. Yet, here she was, attending a workshop on social equity and implicit bias, funded, to her surprise, by Richard Carter's foundation. She had been skeptical at first, unsure whether this was a punishment or an opportunity. But as the hours passed and she listened to stories of pain and perseverance, Lisa began to feel a shift. One of the speakers, a tall man with a quiet but commanding presence, stepped to the front of the room. His name was David, and his story was one of heartbreak and resilience. "I remember the first time I was told I wasn't right for a job," David began, his voice steady but tinged with bitterness. "I had all the qualifications, more than enough actually, but the hiring manager wouldn't even look at my resume. He glanced at me and said, 'We're not looking for someone like you.'" The room was silent as he continued. "They didn't see my experience, my skills, or my passion. All they saw was the color of my skin. And that single moment changed the course of my life. It sent me into a spiral of self-doubt, of wondering if I'd ever be more than a box people checked off on a form." Lisa felt a lump rise in her throat. David's words cut deep, each one resonating with her in ways she hadn't anticipated. As the session ended, Lisa remained seated, her thoughts churning. She replayed the events at the airport in her mind, the way she had dismissed Mia without a second thought. She had looked at the young girl and seen… what? Not a prodigy, not an artist, just a kid who didn't belong. David's words echoed in her head. "They didn't see my experience, my skills, or my passion. All they saw." "I did the same thing," Lisa murmured to herself, the weight of her actions settling heavily on her shoulders. "I didn't see her for who she truly was." Later that day, Lisa found herself in the hallway outside the classroom, lost in thought. She didn't notice Richard Carter approaching until he spoke. "How's the program treating you?" he asked, his tone neutral but curious. Lisa looked up, startled. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice hesitant. I didn't expect to see you here." Richard crossed his arms, leaning casually against the wall. "I like to check in on the people we sponsor. It's important to know the impact we're making, or not making." Lisa swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. It's been eye-opening," she admitted. "I've heard things today that I've never really thought about before." Richard nodded. "That's a start. But hearing isn't enough. What matters is what you do with it." Lisa looked up, her eyes glistening. "I don't know if I can ever make up for what I've done." but I want to try. I want to be better." Richard's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. "Change doesn't come from forgetting the past, Lisa. It comes from facing it head-on and choosing to do better every single day." Lisa's lips trembled as she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes. I don't want to be that person anymore." Over the following weeks, Lisa immersed herself in the program, attending every session and engaging in every discussion. She began to see the world and her own actions through a different lens. One day, she found herself sharing her story with the group, her voice trembling as she recounted the events at the airport. "I was wrong," she admitted, her eyes brimming with tears. "I made assumptions about a young girl who deserved none of it. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt her in ways I can never take back." David, the speaker from her first session, nodded encouragingly. "Acknowledging that is the first step. The next step is making sure it doesn't happen again, and helping others understand why it can't." As Lisa's perspective shifted, so did her resolve. She decided to join a community outreach program that worked with at-risk youth, sharing her story as a cautionary tale and a lesson in accountability. At one event, Lisa stood before a group of teenagers, her voice steady as she spoke. "I made mistakes, big ones, but I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to change. It's never too late to see people for who they really are." The audience listened intently, some nodding in understanding. For the first time in a long time, Lisa felt a sense of purpose, a belief that she could make a difference. Richard kept tabs on Lisa's progress, meeting with her periodically to discuss her journey. At one such meeting, Lisa expressed her gratitude, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Not just for the opportunity, but for believing that I could be better." Richard smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Lisa. What matters is what you do with it." Lisa stood at the back of a community center, watching as a group of teenagers laughed and chatted after a workshop she had helped lead. She smiled, a sense of quiet fulfillment settling over her. Her thoughts drifted briefly to Mia, the young girl who had unknowingly set her on this path. "I'll never be able to undo what I did," Lisa thought. "But maybe, just maybe, I can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." With that, she turned and walked out into the crisp evening air, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The grand hall was alive with anticipation. A year had passed since Mia's unforgettable debut, and tonight she stood poised to deliver another performance, one that carried even greater meaning. The concert was part of a benefit event, raising funds to support victims of discrimination and promote educational programs on equality. The stage was illuminated by soft golden lights, and every seat in the auditorium was filled. Among the crowd, in a seat near the back, sat Lisa Carter. She wore a simple outfit, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes scanned the stage, filled with a mix of admiration and lingering regret. Mia had come so far, and Lisa knew she was here tonight, not just as an audience member, but as someone seeking closure. Mia stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding yet serene. The audience erupted into applause, but Mia held up a hand, signaling for quiet. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of the lessons she had learned. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Mia began, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. "A year ago, I stood on a stage like this, nervous and unsure of myself. That day taught me something important, not just about resilience, but about the power of change." She paused, her hands resting lightly on the violin she held. "Music is more than notes strung together. It's a language, a way to communicate the things we can't always put into words. My music tonight is a message that we can change, we can do better, and most importantly, we can choose to love more. The audience was spellbound, the weight of her words sinking deep. Mia raised her violin, and the first notes filled the room, soft and poignant. The melody was one of hope and redemption, weaving together moments of sorrow and triumph. Each note seemed to reach out, touching the hearts of everyone present. Lisa sat frozen, her eyes locked on Mia. The music stirred something in her, a mix of gratitude and guilt. Every note seemed to echo her own journey, from the mistakes she had made to the steps she had taken to make amends. The piece built to a crescendo, then faded into a gentle, healing silence. For a moment, the room remained still, as though the audience was collectively holding its breath. Then, the applause erupted, thunderous and heartfelt. After the concert, Mia stood backstage, greeting well-wishers and admirers. She was radiant, her earlier nerves replaced by a quiet confidence. Lisa lingered near the back of the crowd, hesitant. She clutched her purse tightly, debating whether she should approach. Finally, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Mia," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the chatter. Mia turned, her smile softening when she saw who it was. "Lisa," she said simply. Lisa's hands trembled as she spoke. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed to tell you how sorry I am, for everything, for the way I treated you, for what I said, for what I assumed. You didn't deserve any of it." Mia studied Lisa for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled gently. "My music is meant to heal," Mia said. "If you've changed, then it means it's working. That's enough for me." Tears welled in Lisa's eyes as she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being so much better than I deserved." As Lisa turned to leave, Richard stepped onto the stage, drawing the crowd's attention. His deep voice carried effortlessly through the hall as he addressed the audience. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the talent of my daughter, but the lessons her journey has taught us all," Richard began. "Each of us has the capacity to make mistakes, to fall short, but what defines us is how we choose to learn from those mistakes. Tonight, we take another step forward toward a world where kindness and understanding triumph over prejudice and fear." The crowd erupted into applause once more, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Lisa exited the auditorium into the cool night air, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of forgiveness, not just from Mia, but from herself. As she walked away, she glanced back at the glowing windows of the concert hall. Inside, she knew Mia was surrounded by love and admiration, fulfilling her purpose as both an artist and a messenger of hope. Mia stood near the edge of the stage, watching Lisa disappear into the night. Her heart swelled with a mix of pride and peace. She had not only overcome the challenges thrown her way, but had also helped someone else find a path toward change. As the applause continued to echo in her ears, Mia smiled to herself, her fingers brushing over the smooth wood of her violin. She wasn't just a musician anymore. She was a force for change, a voice for compassion, and a reminder that the world could be a little better, one note at a time. As Mia stood at the edge of the stage, the weight of the evening's success settling over her, a profound sense of gratitude filled her heart. The hall, once alive with applause, was now quiet as the audience began to filter out, carrying with them not just the memory of her music, but also the message she had woven into every note. Her journey had not been easy, but it had been meaningful. Mia had faced doubt, prejudice, and the challenge of believing in herself. Yet, through it all, she had chosen kindness, resilience, and the power of her art to bridge divides and heal wounds. Turning to her parents, who smiled at her from the front row, Mia realized that the evening wasn't just about her triumph. It was about something far greater, the reminder that empathy and understanding can transform even the darkest moments into opportunities for growth and connection. As the lights dimmed and the audience dispersed into the cool evening air, Mia's story lingered, a ripple of hope spreading outward. Somewhere, Lisa walked away from the concert, her heart heavier with reflection but lighter with the possibility of redemption. Somewhere else, a child watched Mia's performance and felt inspired to pick up their own instrument, believing they too could overcome the barriers they faced. Mia's music had reached far beyond the concert hall, touching lives in ways she might never fully know. Stories like Mia's remind us of the strength it takes to choose love over fear, compassion over judgment, and hope over despair. Her music spoke a universal truth that no matter who we are or where we come from, we have the power to heal, to connect, and to inspire. What did this story make you feel? Have you ever faced a moment where understanding and kindness could have made all the difference? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your voice in this ongoing conversation of empathy and growth. If this story touched your heart, don't let it be the last. Subscribe to our channel to join us for more tales of resilience, love, and the human spirit. Together, let's keep spreading messages of hope and unity, one story at a time. Thank you for being part of this journey. We'll see you in the next chapter of life's most meaningful stories.